and put it in her pocket. And a lot of them were doing this, were picking up things and feeling things. I was picking up things and feeling things. There was all kinds of material, metal and stuff laying around. Then we heard it, well, we all heard it, a sound of a motor coming like a truck. And I went back up the incline there to the ridge line, and I could see out there, and there was a truck coming up. It was an old pickup truck, the kind Harry Truman always wore. Then he worked out on the planes out there, and the emitting and stuff. And here comes a military car with a big white star on the side of it, followed by a 6x, which is a military truck with a kind of a canvas wagon type canvas thing over it, and it's full of soldiers. They've got guns, and right behind that was, working these radios, and they all pulled up and stopped. And
which direction had they come from?
They came from the north, from the Horse Springs area, right?
So they could have come off the highway there.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's exactly how they got there. They come off the highway the same way we did. Well, in the meantime, when it stopped, this black soldier, the sergeant, and the reason I know he was a sergeant, my brother told me he was, and he got out of this car, and then a guy got out on the other side, and Glenn said he was a captain. He told me later he was a captain. And this guy had orange-red hair, and all the soldiers then came running over there, pointing guns at people, and telling them, "Get away, get away, get away," And when this creature saw these people, the military, he went nuts. He went into an absolute panic, worse than what he did when he saw us.
Did he move around, or just his eyes? Or?
He just
okay.
Crazy. And it was like he was looking
fearful.
like he was looking for a place to run and hide.
But he never got up.
Never got up. He never left the one injured one next to him. And this red-headed officer, this guy was a real butthole. He made all the threats. He threatened to have people shot if they didn't move
to
away.
everybody?
Oh yeah, get away, get away. We'll shoot. Get away from there. This is a military secret. Just screaming and hollering. And he told my uncle and my father that if they didn't want to spend the rest of their life in prison, they would never say anything about what they saw there. If they ever wanted to see us kids again, they'd take the kids away, and they'd never see the kids, meaning me and Victor, that we'd better keep our mouths shut. If we did not, this is what was going to happen. They were threatening people and pushing people, and
the students as well, and Dr.
Oh yeah,
Busker.
they were hustling everybody. And one of the soldiers pushed my uncle. He had a rifle like this, and he shoved him back like that. Well, that was something you don't do to my Uncle Ted. Ted had a violent temper, and he grabbed the rifle and reached over top and smacked this guy and dropped him right there. And Ted had dropped with a hat. This guy's a cowboy. He'll hit you in a minute. And of course, when he did that, there was bolts opened, and I guess cocking. They were cocking their rifles. They were pointing guns at people, and everybody, Busker and Glenn and Dad, grabbed him, pulled him back and got him away. Don't, man, they're going to shoot. Don't do that, trying to stop this. And I think we came very close to having someone shot. Then they really started threatening, and they interviewed.
Well, did the redhead do all the talking pretty much too?
Pretty much, except once in a while the sergeant would chime in and make statements like that to other people in response to the redhead. But mainly it was the redheaded.
Was there a name tag?
Yes, there was, and his name was Armstrong. And I'm not sure if I know that from having read it or know that from remembering it, now being able to read it in my memory, or if someone said that to me. But his name was Armstrong, was right here on his uniform.
Now, they chased you guys away pretty quick.
Yeah, they did. And they herded us up like cattle, and they moved us up the Arroyo back in the direction we come from, over the protest of this Dr. Busker, who said, no, we've got to go the other way. We came from, I don't care where you came from, get your ass up the Arroyo. And they ran us up the Arroyo. And
so you get to your car then?
Right. Now, they take us up the Arroyo, and just below the hill that we came down, they broke us off and moved us up the hill. Now, this whole time, no one has ever frisked us down. No one has ever checked our pockets to see if we picked up any of this material. And this girl, Agnes, still has that stuff in her pocket, and some of the other students had stuff. To my knowledge, up to that point, they had not been searched. Whether they did so afterward, I don't know. They never searched us, ever. They run us back up the hill, and when we got to where the car was parked, where Dad had parked the car up there, there's a Jeep with a guy sitting in the back, and there's a mounted machine gun in the back of this Jeep, and all these soldiers. The Jeep pulls out, we're told to get in the car, we follow the Jeep, and the soldiers go with us, all the way back out to the highway. When we get back out to the highway, they set us right there. They wouldn't let us out of the car, they wouldn't let us move forward. I don't know whether they were making a decision or what. When we got out to the highway, this place was absolutely full of military personnel, military equipment. There was airplanes sitting out there that they had landed on the highway.
Did you see any airplanes when you were back at the site?
Yeah, there was airplanes in the sky, but nobody thought much about it. You know, I didn't think anything about it. I was used to airplanes being in the sky, having, you know, been raised in Indianapolis, Indiana, the home of the Nordum bomb site. You know, the sky was always full of military aircraft. I never thought nothing about it. And when we get back onto the highway, there's observation aircraft, you know, high-winged aircraft, and there's one, what I know now to be a C-47 sitting there, and how we didn't hear that land's beyond me. And how he landed, well, of course, I guess you could land if you're a good pilot out there, because there was no telephone poles or anything. And it was, they had tore the fence down on the north side of that highway, and all this equipment was setting back up there, and that plane was up there, and they were taking stuff out of the plane. There was military ambulances, and there was trucks with wreckers, cranes on them, and there was tankers, like maybe had fuel or water in them. There was just, everywhere you looked, there was military. And
a major recovery operation.
Yeah, it looked like an invasion force. It really did. And they were all wearing these light khaki uniforms. They didn't look like, you know, olive drabs. They were light khaki, and they all had the same patch over there, that kind of blue funny patch with the circles on it, was on their shoulder. And
Did you have any clue as to where they came from? Did your brother or your uncle?
No, I don't know where they came from. I don't think anybody ever ascertained that. There were a lot of them had MP patches, and some of them were wearing nightsticks off of these webbed utility belts. They had nightsticks, and they had 45s and holsters, you know, the automatics in a fold-over holster. And these were the people who were given most of the orders. They had the road barricaded off out there, and we sat there for a very long time, and, you know, we were getting thirsty and everything, and we asked, you know, if we could go back to Horse Springs and get some water. Oh, no, you can't go through there. And right after that, they said, no, you just turn around and you head out of here now, and you go to Socorro, and this is a redhead again, you keep your mouth shut, just keep going, and don't look back. Well, as we drove away, you know, Dad and I said, hell with it, we'll go to Magdalena, we'll get water in Magdalena, you know, because that's where John Trujillo lived, their relative with Ted. And so as we drove away, I was looking out the back window, and I could see Dr. Buskirk and these kids, and that guy that got out of the pickup was standing there, and this Dr. Buskirk was doing just like this in this redheaded officer's face, and he kept pointing back behind him. And I guess that meant, you know, we got to go back that way, and he was fed up with this guy or something, and he was shaking his finger in his face while they were yelling at each other. And that's pretty much the last I saw of the whole situation. I don't know what happened after that, because we just kept going.
Did you get home before dark?
Oh, yeah, it was before dark.
Me out to the back of the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home. The black sergeant that was rough, he said he did not see any other officer coming out. He said that, you know, in the ambulance, a lot of trouble. She said, would you please leave and get out of here? Well, they'd only been there approximately, only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was their first assignment out to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was, then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well. They'd only been there approximately, only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was their first assignment out to the air base. And probably a couple hours later, then I got an emergency.
At one point, you finally offered to take care of it for them.
Well, I offered 2-3 times, yeah. And I said, of course, he knew enough we had any in stock, and I said, no, but if I can make a call now.
Say a couple things. Okay, first of all, the phone was ringing, right?
Okay, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon, and I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base, Army Airfield Base, and he was inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. And at that time, I know that we had used like the 4 feet and caskets. We had used those before, but I thought they also made them in a 3/6. So, he wanted to know if we had any in stock, and I said no. But if I can make a call to Amarillo, I can have him in, by 7 o'clock the next morning on the truck. So he said, I'll get back to you, and that was the first contact that I had with the base.
And then what?
Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what the preparation, what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, And he said, we need to know also what if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them, and if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would. And I said, of course, he knew exactly how we would treat those bodies because we have an outline from them and what we really have to do. I think he already at that point knew exactly what we would have to do.
Did he disclose to you what he had?
No, I told him. I said, if you have a problem, if you want, if you have something you don't really know what to do about it, let me come out, and I'll try to help you do whatever you want to do. And he said, and he said, no. He said,
let's just back up just a minute. Let's start again with you were saying you told him that you can come out and take care of what he had, right?
Yeah.
Why don't you pick it up from that point again?
So anyway, he said, well, we don't really have anything. He said, we're sitting here thinking in case we should get involved in something like this, what would be our preparation? Should we do? Then I went through, I said, do you really want to know how we would do it? Well, yes, we would like to know. So that's when I explained to him that we would have the vats that we would fill up with formaldehyde solution with water. And we put the bodies in them, let them stay there for 24 hours and then take them out. And then we would pack the bodies in, would be a sawdust and really a lime, what we would pack them in, then wrap them in the plastic. That's bodies that were badly decomposed. If there was tissue, deep tissue, we would have to do it hypodermically with needles to get to the deep tissue. Then we would have to aspirate the cavities if the cavities hadn't already ruptured, and then put some cavity fluid in those. So that's, kind of normal procedure.
Now, at one point, you finally offered to take care of it for them.
Well, I offered 2-3 times, yeah.
Can you review that conversation at that point?
You mean when I offered to take care of them?
Yeah.
He said, well, we don't really, right at this time, we don't really need your assistant. But he said, in case something like this should happen, then he said we would be prepared and we would know what to do. Mm-hmm. Then we got back onto the subject of maybe not damaging any of the chemicals, compounds or anything with the bodies or, tissues, whatever. Because and they wanted, how would you pick bodies up like that and what would you do not to contaminate any of it?
Didn't this begin to seem a little strange to you at that point?
Well, I thought maybe what happened, they might have had a VIP or, some officer and something that happened. Maybe they didn't want to keep it quiet and they probably want to do it themselves, not be involved with the civilian businesses or anything.
So after these conversations, you were curious and you went on out to the base, as I understand it. Can you review that?
Well, I didn't go out to the base. Yeah, I was curious, but I didn't go out to the base and probably a couple hours later. And I'd got an emergency call. There was an airman that was injured in an accident. And I took the airman to the base. He rode in the ambulance with me, and I took him out to the emergency room, and that's the way I became really involved out at the base. I didn't go out just because I was curious.
Give me the sequence from the time you picked up the airman and just describe to me.
Well, when I got the call, I left the funeral home, and the ambulance went to the scene of the accident, picked the airman up. I did not place him on a stretcher because he had a head injury in the nose. I think his nose was fractured. So I did some minor first aid, and then he sat in the front seat with me all the way to the base. When we got to the base, then he walked into the emergency room. I didn't have to take him in. They didn't bring out a gurney or anything. He just walked in on his own. Then I never did see him after that. Then I had this friend that I wanted to talk to and see. This is a lieutenant nurse that I knew quite well, that had only been there approximately, only been commissioned and been out to sign. This was her first assignment out to the air base. And I wanted to talk to her, and so I was going down the hall, and first thing, the lieutenant that I wanted to see was coming out of one room, going across the hall to the other, and she noticed it was me. She said, "How did you get in here, and what are you doing in here?" And she said, "You better get out in a hurry." She said, "You're going to get in a lot of trouble." She said, "Would you please leave and get out of here in a hurry?" And then I turned around, and she went on into the other room. Then in about the time I turned around, there was another officer said, "Hey, wait a minute," and I said, "Looks like you had a crash." He said, "I see there's some, in the ambulances out there, I see a lot of wrecking." I said, "Where was the crash?" And he said, "There wasn't any crash." And he said, "Just wait a minute." And then he said, "Wait a minute." And I, stood there for a minute. And he turned around, and evidently he must have waited for somebody else to come out because there was another officer coming out. He said, "This man says there was a crash out at the base." He said he was inquiring about our crash. And this was when I encountered, he was a red-headed officer, and very nasty, very rough. He said, "You did not see any crash. There was not any crash." And he said, "You get the hell out of here, and you didn't see anything, and you don't talk to anybody." He said, "You're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble." And I said, "Look, I'm a civilian, doing the damn thing you can do to me about it." He said, "No, but somebody might be picking your bones out of the sand." That's when he made the remark there. Then there was a black sergeant that was standing beside him, and he said, "Yeah, but he would make better dog food for our dogs." Of course, I didn't understand that, but my father happened to be an old trapper and for a hobby and everything. And I said, "My father uses guys like you for baiting these coyote traps." And then there was two MPs that joined me right on, took me outside, and each holding me by my elbows, and escorted me out back to the ambulance and followed me all the way back to the funeral home.
Now, as you were entering the hospital, you saw something in 3 trucks.
Yeah, because usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. So when I went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and, I just happened to look in. And that's when I saw some debris, or it looked like parts of a plane or something, that they hadn't had a crash. As I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces and the old ambulances in.
Can you describe the debris?
Yeah, I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet, long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. And it looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. And what was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe there was some designs or something. It kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And it was probably about 3 inches and high, and probably the length of what the wreckage I saw, it looked like it was the length. And the same thing was in the other ambulance too. I mean, I saw practically the same thing. The pieces that were practically the same size, and the insignias looked like whatever that might be, was part of the wreckage.
How did your friend feel about what she saw?
Well, I didn't know really until the next day. And I called out. I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, "I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available." And she said, "Why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club, and we'll have lunch. And I want to talk to you." And the funeral home, at that time we had some of the businesses there had an associate membership to the officers club, and our funeral home had that membership, and also had a card to identify myself and what business that I was associated with. So I had no problem. One time I go to the base, all I had to do, a lot of times if it was in the evening, I'd have to stop and sign a visitor's and get a visitor's pass and then turn it in when I left. But there was no problem going out there. So I went on out and met her. Beg your pardon?
Tell me about lunch.
Well, we, both ordered. I'm not remember what we ordered, but it was just a light lunch. But she was so upset. She looked like she was, in shock, is what she really talked like and looked like. And she said, I said, "Well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened." And she said, "Well, you won't believe it." And she says, "I don't believe it either." But she said, "I got in a lot of trouble on this thing. I'm not real sure about this." But she said, then she pulled out of a little purse or a little pocketbook, whatever she had there. She gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and a face and so on. She told me that this is what was in those, that it was a crash. wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time.
These were bodies.
Yeah, but she said we have 3 bodies. There was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it might have lived a little while. And she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. The 2 of the bodies were you couldn't identify much because they were practically destroyed. And it looked like maybe that they might have been a predatory animal or something might have been doing some damage on the bodies too.
How did she describe your head, your hands?
Well, she said the head, and the little drawings that I had, the way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end on the underside at the tip of each fingers was a pad-like, maybe a little pad, but it looked like the skin had maybe a little suction, like the little suction cups on those. On the, no fingernails on the hands. The head, the lips were very just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine line, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a real a gums, or maybe it was. She said, explain it. It was almost as hard as if it was rawhide, maybe at that. The ears. There was only 2 small orifices on each side of the head, with looked like a couple of small lobes that might cover both of those, but there was not a protruding ear. And also that the nose, there was only 2 small orifices in the nose. There was really no nose that was convex. It was all just flesh with the face.
Was she emotional about all this?
Very much so. Very emotional. She would have to stop and drink water every once in a while, and also she never touched a meal. All the time we were talking in an hour and a half that we were there, she never touched a meal.
Any other demonstrations of emotion? Indications of how she was upset?
Well, just, every once in a while she'd go like this, and wringing her hands, and she said it was the most horrified. I've never been so horrified in my life. I've never seen anything so gruesome in my life. I've never smelt anything that smelt worse in my life. And she told me that when I saw her, she was leaving the room to go to the bathroom because she was deathly ill and was going to throw up.
Did she recognize any of the doctors by the examining the body?
She told me, she said, I asked her that question, which of the doctors, and she said, I don't know that I knew them, and that was her answer. So, but she said she walked in the room and they said, hey, we need you need to help us. And that was the way she became involved in it. And then she got ill. The doctors also became very ill. They would have to do a little examination, then they'd have to leave and go sit down, and then they would come back and do a little bit more. It was that bad.
After your conversation with her at lunch, can you describe what happened next? How you were unable to see her again, and how you learned the...
Well,
we were just sitting there next to the one that was still alive that appeared to be
Were they right next to the vehicle?
right next to it, right under the edge of it. Victor was prevalent in the area, my brother being an amateur rock hound and wanted to get some of this, and it was a way of showing us around the area. And they had relatives down in Victor was prevalent in the area, my brother being an amateur rock hound and wanted to get some of this, and it was a way of showing us around the area. And they had relatives down in Magdalena that they wanted to introduce us to. So we had gone down there, and we got down in the Horse Springs area and had driven off onto the plains down an old rutted road for a mile or so, and seemed like a long ways. We parked the car, got out of the car, and walked down a hillside, a semi-forested, I guess you could say. It had pinon trees and scrub oak and stuff like that on it. And we'd walked, well, not scrub oak, but cedar, and walked down the hillside into an arroyo, a dry wash, and then walked south down a dry wash toward where the agates were supposed to be at. And as we came around a bend in the arroyo that had pinon and cedar trees growing on it, we were able to see farther ahead down the arroyo, and on the next ridge line, there was a large silver disc-shaped object was embedded in the side of the ridge line, and there was debris and wreckage and stuff strewn about the area, but mainly this thing was intact. I would estimate its size from an adult perspective to be something like 35 feet in diameter. I've heard other people who were there say they thought it was like 50 feet, but as an adult I would say about 35 feet in diameter, quite large. When we got up to it, there were 4 bodies there, not human. There was 2 of them who were obviously dead. One of them was obviously very badly injured, and one of them apparently suffered no ill effects, or didn't appear to be injured, and was ambulatory, was mobile. I was just sitting there next to the one that was still alive and appeared to be.
Were they right next to the vehicle?
Right next to it, right under the edge of it. And this craft had apparently come in from the east, bounced off one ridge line, went plowing through this arroyo area, and then crashed into the ridge line and embedded itself. And they were sitting back under the edge. It was kind of tilted up like this, and they were sitting back under the edge here. And I'm assuming that this one creature that was all right had laid this material on the ground, but it looked like unrolled tinfoil that these other three creatures were laying on, like it was trying to, like you do a person in shock, you put them on a blanket kind of thing. And apparently it had some boxes there around it, and had apparently been trying to give first aid or help these other creatures when we first got there. And as we approached, the creature drew back like this, like it was in fear of us, like we were going to hurt it. And it wasn't very long, trying to communicate with it. The adults were. It seemed to calm down and just sat there and kind of looked back and forth, watching him, apparently trying to figure out what was going on.
What did it look like a little bit more?
These creatures, all of them were about 4 foot tall, 4.5 feet tall. They had very large heads that were shaped larger on the top, and they kind of tapered down. Not to a real sharp point, but just tapered down where they were thin. And they had very large, oval-shaped or almond-shaped, I guess you could say, black eyes. They were so shiny, they had almost a bluish tint to them when the light reflected off them. Their skin coloration, I think the best way I could describe that is kind of a bluish tinted milky white. It looked like someone in shock. And the ones that were laying on the ground were really looked more that way, more blue.
How about ears, nose, mouth?
No, there was no visible ears on the creatures, except like if you was just to cover your ear like this, to where there was just a rise there and then a hole, without your earlobe and the rest of the ear there.
How about nose?
It was the nose was very small, almost imperceptible, and just like two holes straight in, and the lips were just a straight line, just like a cut, and you couldn't see any visible lips like we have. It was just a slit. And
What
they
hair
never made
color?
a sound. Pardon?
What hair color?
There was no hair. They were completely bald.
And no sounds?
I never heard a sound of one, not out of any of the creatures, including one of us.
Did you see fingers?
Yeah, they had fingers like this. They didn't have a little finger. They just had the thumb and 3 extra digits, except the center digit was longer, and the other 2 were about the same size. They were very long and slender. It looked very delicate, and I've made the statement before, and I'll make it again. I think it would have made excellent violinists because of the structure of their hands. They were wearing one-piece suits. All of them were dressed exactly the same, and it was sort of a real shiny, silverish gray color.
No zippers, buttons?
No, I saw no zippers, no buttons.
Insignia?
No insignias. The only thing that was different, they all had this, but the only thing that was different from the silvery gray suit was that down like the seam on it, like it was a seam on the shoulder, and around the collar it was trimmed in what appeared to be maroon, like cording. Then the suits were continuous with their footgear. You could see right about this area down, it seemed to be less pliable than it was up here, like this was a stiffer area, like it was boots or shoes or something. But they were all dressed exactly the same.
Okay, so you and your family are talking back and forth, wondering what was going on. What did your family say? I mean, did they say anything?
Yeah, my brother, one of the first remarks I heard made was, that's a goddamn spaceship. There was bodies up there, and I was told not to go up there, which I did. And
how old was your brother at the time?
he was in his early 20s, I think 20 months.
Okay. He was a lot older than you were.
Oh yes, considerably. When we got up there, I kind of meandered off to one side. The thing was cocked up, and I was standing here. The bodies were here, and everybody else was kind of down here, except my cousin Victor was over here playing, looking in this gaping hole on the side of this disc, and it's shaped just like a discus, except for a round dome was up on top, and there was this big gaping gash in here where you could see inside. It looked like a double hall.
How big a length? The
The
gash?
dome?
Oh, the gash.
Well, it covered the greater majority from the center of the craft out. It was just like a gaping hole in there. And I'm thinking, it's like about 30 feet, 35 feet diameter, so we're talking about 17 feet maybe.
Uh-huh.
And most of that one side was ripped open like that. And you could see inside, and you could see another double hull like in there, and there was these rows of components that was on there, and there was lights that flashed on off. Some of them were steady, some were flashing. There was a lot of debris and stuff hanging out of the hole. There was evidence that there had apparently been fire. It looked like it had been burnt along the edge there, the gash.
Now, this wasn't a gash that could have been caused by the thing coming into the ground. It wasn't at the leading edge of the vehicle.
No, no, this was in a side, like, it almost appeared, it was elliptical. It almost appeared as if something the same shape as the disc we were looking at had hit that same, had hit the disc and left an imprint that pretty closely approximated the outside diameter of the disc itself. And it appeared to be caved inward.
Okay.
And kind of like, you'd hit it like this, and it just crumpled and caved in and ripped it open.
Okay, so you're there, you take all this and everybody's mystified. What were the circumstances outside? Hot, cold?
Very, very hot. Well, to me, being the first time in New Mexico and coming from back east, that dry heat was just like being inside an oven. It was unbelievable to me. And that was the odd part about this thing. The closer you got to it, the cooler it was. And standing under it in the shade there, next to these creatures' bodies, it was like refrigerated air conditioning. And
did you feel air coming out of this thing? Or
no, it was just like it was ambient. And I remember reaching up and putting my hand on the side of it, and I think I was afraid it was going to hit my head because there was enough room for me as a small child, I was approximately the same size as these creatures to walk up under there and stand there, but I kind of did like that, put my hand up against this thing.
What did it feel like?
It was ice cold. It felt like it just came out of the freezer.
Was it smooth? Was it rough?
It was very smooth. It had a very smooth texture to it. It was obviously made out of metal. It was very solid, and it was very cold, ice cold. And there was a smell in the area. It smelled volatile, acrid, like acetone. And that seemed to be coming out of that gash, that smell. But the closer you got to this thing, the cooler it was. So I kind of remained there, and I guess that while they were over here, my father and my Uncle Ted and my brother, and Uncle Ted was trying to talk to this thing in Spanish, and of course it didn't understand a word he said. And Dad tried to talk to it, and then they tried, sign language, and that didn't work. And I don't know, for some reason, I just, I reached down and touched it, this one that was laying next to me. And when I touched it, I realized, I jumped back. It scared me and startled me because I suddenly realized that these weren't dolls. I thought they were plastic dolls. And I was still in my mind, these are moving dolls. Until I touched it, and I realized, this was a dead thing. I'd seen dead relatives before, and I unfortunately had made a mistake one time touching a relative that was in a casket. I just knew this is a dead thing, and it scared me, and I ran around behind my father and my uncle, and this thing was sitting there on the ground, and it kept looking back and forth, and it just had its hands like it's in its lap, and it just kept looking back and forth between the three of them, and like it was trying to understand. And all of a sudden, it just turned and looked right straight at me, between my Uncle Ted and myself. And this is when it was just like an explosion of things in my head, things I started, feeling just terrible depression, loneliness, and fear, and just, awful feelings that just suddenly burst into my mind. And I don't know if that meant that it was communicating with me, and I was the only one there I could communicate with because I was a kid. I don't know. I turned and ran, and I ran across the arroyo and up on the area that it had bounced off of during the crash, and was just standing there looking down at this scene, and my family, and off in the distance I could see cattle grazing, I could see a windmill, and I could see dust trails out on the plains out there. And I was there for a little while, and then I came back down, and I guess we were there, Victor was when I got back down there, Victor was up in the crack, and Ted yelled at him to get out of there, and Glenn went over and grabbed him by the belt and jerked him off.
That's your brother?
Yeah, and jerked him off and said, get out of there, you could cause this thing to explode and kill us all, and of course he went prowling around in there. I was kind of standing off to one side looking, that's why I knew that I could look off these rocks that I was standing on, look right into this thing. That's why I knew, about the lights and the components and stuff. And then, I heard other people talking, and I turned, and there was a group of people coming up the arroyo from out on the plains, from the south. They had come up there, and of course they walked up and was talking, and
how many?
There was an older man and 5 younger students.
Boys, girls?
There was 3 boys and 2 girls. And they were all, introducing, talking to my father and my uncle and my brother.
What did the older one look like?
The
man.
leader of this group,
Yep.
the man, he was a very tall man, very big man. He was wearing a pith helmet when he first came up, one of those kind of explorer helmets. And he was bald, and I know that because he had taken it off, and he had done this, a couple times with a handkerchief and put it back on. He was a balding man, and he had a round face. He was very ruddy complected. He's a big man, and he apparently was a doctor because they kept calling him doctor. And as I understand it, was an archaeological group that was out there on some kind of summer thing, and they talked, and he apparently was able to speak several foreign languages. And he tried to talk to this creature several times in different languages, and again to no avail.
How did he happen to be there? Had he seen the thing?
Well, they claimed that they said they saw this thing come down the night before, flaming, and they thought it was a meteorite. And they had talked about, well, in the morning, we'll go over there and see this, where this meteor came down, because that's what they thought it was. And when the sun came up the next morning, and they got about their business and got up, and somebody looked over and said, they saw all the shiny metal and stuff across the plains there, and they realized it wasn't a meteorite, it may have been an airplane, and that crashed, so they all decided to go over there and see if there was anybody who was alive, that was hurt, that needed help.
They had driven over?
No, they walked over, apparently, the way I understand it. And it's quite a ways across that plain, so it had to take a very long time to do this. Or they may have had a vehicle, I don't know. That's an assumption, I think, on my part. They walked.
Okay, so they're around with
but
your
they
family.
came across the plains nonetheless. I'm not sure if they drove or not. I didn't hear any cars.
And then somebody else showed up.
Yeah, they were down there just, 15, maybe 20 minutes tops, and they were picking up things from the students. And this Dr. Buskirk, that they called him, this one girl went up and said, "Look, doctor, wouldn't this make a beautiful ring?" And she was holding what looked like a red rod, or a red tube of some kind of a silvery red. And he kind of snapped at her, and "Put that down, Agnes. You don't know what that is. I think it hurts you. Just don't pick this stuff up." And she kind of said, "Well, yeah, okay, doctor." And then he went back to what he was doing, and she walked away and put it in her pocket. And a lot of them were doing this, sort of picking up things and feeling things. I was picking up things and feeling things. There was all kinds of material, metal and stuff laying around. Then we heard it. Well, we all heard it. A sound of a motor coming like a truck. And I went back up the incline there to the ridge line, and I